Hello, everyone. So I will be talking about Fiat Shamir. Oh, there's the second line of the title is a leftover. It's the post-quantum security of Fiat Shamir. Ignore the quantum forking conjecture. So the first thing I should probably tell you, because a lot of you might not know it, is what is Fiat Shamir? So what is the crypto system that I will be talking about? And Fiat Shamir is a crypto system that is supposed to implement so-called non-interactive proof systems. So what is a proof system in cryptography? So for now, this is classical cryptography, nothing quantum involved. So we have two entities, a prover and a verifier. The prover gets as input a certain statement that he wants to prove is true. So for example, in a cryptographic context, it might be something like the following encryption has a plain text that contains only ASCII characters or something like that. And in addition, the prover gets a witness, so some information that allows to check the statements. So for example, the witness could be the decryption key with which we can check that the plain text has a certain condition. And then we have a second entity, the verifier, who only knows the statement. So the verifier knows that we want to show that the plain text has a certain property, but we do not want to give to the verifier the secret key. And now we are asking, is there some protocol so that the prover can just send one message, that's the non-interactive part, to convince the verifier that the statement is true? And we want two properties here. We would like that the verifier will know nothing about the witness. Because if this is, for example, my secret key, then the verifier should not learn the secret key. The verifier should only learn that the statement is true. And second, we would like it to be a so-called proof of knowledge, meaning that the prover should be unable to prove the truth of the statement if it isn't true. So that's what we call a proof. And a proof of knowledge is something stronger. Not only should a successful verification imply that that there is such a witness, so meaning that it can be proven in principle, but it should guarantee that the prover actually knows the witness. So that's a stronger restriction. I will not go into all the definitions of these things, especially proof of knowledge can be a bit subtle, and in the quantum setting it's given even more subtle, but fortunately we don't need that to understand the talk. So the question is, so this is kind of the goal. We want to build such a proof system in one message. How can we do it? And one construction that does this, I think it was originally formulated for signatures, but we can restate it in the proof system setting, and some things become clearer because several properties are separated into, well, it's more modular, the analysis. So, oh no, sorry, there's one more thing I wanted to say. So I have talked about zero-knowledge proofs of knowledge, but Fiat Shamir and also many other non-interactive proof systems can at the same time be seen as a digital signature scheme. What's the relation? So why would there be anything between the two that's related? Well, on a very rough level, you can use a non-interactive proof system as a signature scheme by just sending as a signature a proof that you know your own secret key. And no one else can do that, so no one else can produce signatures. Now, there are subtleties like where does the message go and so on. That can all be solved, but I don't want to go into the details. Basically, just take the message. If you have a zero-knowledge proof of knowledge with certain extra properties, such as so-called simulation soundness and so on, you can build signatures, which is why there has been recently also a lot of interest in post-quantum secure signatures, and Fiat Shamir is one of the possibilities how one might do that. So now let me, and the question that I want to answer in this talk is this thing quantum secure? Yeah? Because it's well studied in the classical setting, but in the quantum setting, things suddenly get very subtle and confusing and so on, for reasons that I cannot describe in detail here because that would be a full extra talk. But basically take the message that we know a lot about Fiat Shamir in the classical setting, and we know almost only negative results in the quantum settings. But if we want to build, for example, efficient signatures, we would like to know the answer. Is this secure against a quantum computer? So how does Fiat Shamir actually work? To understand how it works, I mean how we build, what the protocol does, we need to understand one more concept, that of a Sigma protocol. So a Sigma protocol is again a proof system. So also something which a prover can use to convince a verifier of a certain statement, except that we do not require it to be non-interactive. Instead, a Sigma protocol has 3 messages. They are traditionally called commitment, challenge, and response. And again, we have 2 properties, but we have a few more, but I skip those that are kind of usually not troublesome. One is honest verifier, zero knowledge. On a very rough level, it means if you run this protocol, the verifier will not learn anything again. It's a different variation of the same thing. And we have computational special soundness, which roughly means that the prover cannot trick the verifier. But it's a somewhat specific variation of this scheme, a bit stronger than than just saying the prover cannot prove a wrong statement. But again, I'm skipping the details in order not to get too technical, especially since this property is one that in the quantum setting will not be sufficient anyway. So this is a Sigma protocol, so just again, a zero-knowledge proof system in 3 messages. And the Fiat Shamir construction, what it does is it takes a Sigma protocol, so something of this form, with these properties and a few more reasonable properties, and transforms it into a non-interactive proof system. And how do we do that? The prover, who wants to convince the verifier but wants to send only 1 message, internally in his head runs the Sigma protocol. So in his head, the prover runs an interactive proof and then sends the messages that were sent in the interactive proof to the verifier. And now the intuition is, if this interactive proof system is something that is convincing, and I send it to the verifier, then the verifier should be convinced, right? He sees a convincing interaction. Well, that's not fully true, because the prover could just make up such an interaction with a cheating verifier. There's nothing that forces the prover to have an honest verifier. So the prover could just simulate a verifier that cheats in order to trick itself. Yeah? So this verifier here, the simulated one, would just send a challenge that makes it easy to finish the proof even if the statement is wrong. And then we send something which might prove a wrong statement. So this does not work. The verifier here, the non-interactive one, needs to somehow make sure that this simulated proof transcript somehow stems from an honest interaction. And the trick what we do here is that instead of simulating the verifier just that it sends a random message, as the honest verifier would do, we take the commitment and a bit of other stuff, namely the statement, but I skipped that in this talk to make the formula simpler. So instead of sending a random challenge, the challenge is picked as the hash of the commitment. And intuitively, you would now expect that if the hash, the prover cannot influence what the hash will be. The hash is intuitively just some random value, and we can't pick that value so that it does break the protocol. So in other words, now we have a simulated interaction which is in some way honest on the side of the verifier. Therefore, this interaction will be a sensibly made interaction, and if this sensibly made interaction convinces the verifier, that means that the statement that was to be proven is actually true. Now, proving that can be quite tricky, and actually we can only prove it even in classical crypto if this hash function h is assumed to be a random function, a so-called random oracle. In the quantum setting, unfortunately, things are not so nice. Because we showed some years ago that in general, so with quantum adversaries, so let's say someone attacks this, the prover is still, it's still a classical protocol. We send a classical message, but the prover uses a quantum computer to construct that message. And now we can show that there is some, at least some instantiation of these sigma protocols, very contrived one, in a setting with some hypothetical oracles in which the Fiat Shamir construction is not secure. Even if the sigma protocol satisfies the usual criteria that it should satisfy in the classical setting to guarantee security. So what does that mean? Well, especially there is this relative to specific oracle. So it could be that Fiat Shamir is totally fine when we are not in some hypothetical oracle setting, but that means also it's probably much harder to prove because most security proofs of constructions like Fiat Shamir, if they work in the bare model, they also work in a setting with some oracles added. That's called a relativizing proof. Most proofs are relativizing. So it seems that it would be very hard to prove the security of Fiat Shamir. So what can we do? There are three possible ways out. The first would be to try to find a non-relativizing proof of the security of Fiat Shamir. I have no formal argument why this would not be possible, but my personal experience with proofs is that I'm not very optimistic that we can find one for this kind of thing. But there have been surprises in crypto, so I wouldn't fully exclude it. But it seems to be the hardest way. Second way out is to just say, well, let's remove Fiat Shamir, let's forget it, let's make some other construction which we can prove. That actually works. So I have a paper on that where I prove an alternative. Unfortunately, it is less efficient than Fiat Shamir. And also it's less established. So the thing is that people might want to keep using existing schemes that use Fiat Shamir, and we might want to know whether they are secure or not. And a third way out would be to say, okay, we stick to Fiat Shamir. We don't try non-relativizing proofs, but we add some conditions on the sigma protocol. So recall, earlier we had said if the sigma protocol is honest, verifies zero knowledge, and has computational special soundness, then Fiat Shamir is secure. This doesn't work in the quantum setting, but what if we say the sigma protocol has these two properties and one more, then it works. Let's see. So let's first summarize what we know in the classical setting. So the classical security of Fiat Shamir, so this is basically a theorem, except that I cut out some of the more boring but still necessary conditions. So it says, assume that the sigma protocol you use has computational special soundness and honest verifier zero knowledge. Then Fiat Shamir is a proof of knowledge, even something that is called simulation sound extractable for those who know those fancy words. And it is zero knowledge, as long as the hash function is modeled as a random function. So that's the situation we have in the classical setting. What is it that I can prove in my paper? So if we are talking about classical security, quantum security of Fiat Shamir, then if I replace the assumption about computational special soundness by statistical soundness, so this means that the sigma protocol needs to have the soundness property even if the prover is computationally unlimited. Yeah, so just allowing a quantum power prover is not sufficient. It needs to be really an unlimited prover. And if the sigma protocol has still security in that setting, then I can show the security of Fiat Shamir. But not the kind of security I showed before, because instead of proving that it's a proof of knowledge, I can only show that it's a proof. Meaning, I can show that if the statement is false, the prover can never prove it to be true, but it might be possible that the prover can prove the statement to be true without knowing a witness. Yeah, it's a subtle difference, which unfortunately can sometimes be very relevant. So let me tell you very quickly what the basic idea is on how we show the soundness of Fiat Shamir, because this is the part that was kind of giving us trouble. And with the extra assumption that the sigma protocol we have here has statistical soundness, we can prove the security of Fiat Shamir, which is depicted here. In order to do that, we first define a simple auxiliary notion. Namely, we call a challenge, so a message that with which the verifier answers, promising if there exists some response to it that will make the verifier accept. I'm not saying that this response might be easy to find. It's just, well, it's a simple definition. Either it exists or it doesn't. And if there is a response that exists, then I call it promising, in the sense that at least there's some possibility that the prover could finish the proof. Whether it is promising depends, of course, what the commitment was, what the statement is, and so on. And now, if the proof system has statistical soundness, then we can show relatively easily that there cannot be many promising responses. Because if there would be a lot of promising responses, it would be likely that the verifier sends a promising response, and an unlimited prover would then find the corresponding answer and break the proof. Well, if I say not many promising, I mean, when proving a wrong statement, trying to prove a wrong statement, there are not many promising responses. So that means, well, if you want to make a proof, a Fiat Shamir proof, this necessarily needs to be a promising response too, because otherwise the whole thing can never be true. So to make a wrong proof in Fiat Shamir, you will need to find an input to the hash function that outputs a promising response, and there aren't many. And now you pay a bit attention to see that basically this boils down to just searching in a totally random function, because whether there is a promising response as an output for some input or not will turn out to be fully random, uniformly random. So it just boils down to the search in an unstructured sparse function, and we know that that is hard even for a quantum computer. So basically Grover's algorithm is the best we can do. That shows the soundness. I'm running slightly low on time, so I'm skipping the zero knowledge part. I didn't have much interesting things to say anyway. So to recap, what we have so far is we have a new result, but we need a stronger assumption than classically, and we get a weaker result, namely only a proof, not a proof of knowledge. But it's a start. But you may ask, well, what does this now have to do with signatures, if you're mostly interested in those? Because you may remember that you can get signatures from Fiat Shamir, but this proof crucially, the typical proof crucially uses that Fiat Shamir is a proof of knowledge. Well, it turns out you can still prove the security of a signature scheme based on Fiat Shamir if you use only the fact that it's a proof, not a proof of knowledge. Unfortunately, you will then need one extra assumption about the key generation. Basically, normally the key generation function only needs to guarantee that given the public key, you cannot guess the secret key. That would normally be enough in this context. Here you need something stronger. You need that a valid public key is computationally indistinguishable from an invalid public key, so from a public key where there exists no secret key. That's harder to make, but it's, sorry, the best I could come up with. And then you get the following theorem. Assume the sigma protocol has statistical soundness, as I mentioned already, and is honest verifier zero knowledge. And the key generation algorithm we use in our signature scheme has a dual mode hard instance generator. That's the thing I mentioned with the invalid looking public keys. Then Fiat Shamir is an unforgeable signature scheme. Again, I omitted some boring conditions, but, well, they are boring. Interesting open problems. Well, find good instantiations for sigma protocols with dual mode hard instance generators. I mean, something that satisfies all of these to get efficient post-quantum secure signatures. So I don't know a good, I mean, I know instantiations, but I don't know competitive ones. So that's an interesting question where I would love answers. And on the other side, we could ask, can we strengthen my result? Can we, for example, somehow prove extractability? So I've been spending something like 3 years on that and haven't done it yet. So it seems to be tricky. Or can we somewhat weaken the assumption that we have statistical soundness into some strengthening of computational soundness? Because in the interactive case, things like that have worked, so perhaps. And let me finish with this picture to show where we are kind of in this research area. Basically, if we are looking for efficient proofs or signatures, we come from two directions. We have the theory of understanding Fiat Shamir, like making less and less assumptions and get stronger properties. And we have the search for faster instantiations that match those assumptions for the Sigma protocol. So this is some kind of lattice stuff and so on. This work was clearly on this side, so I have no progress on this. But as you see, work on either side will make this gap smaller, and hopefully these two arrows will romantically kiss in the end. Thank you for your attention.